Good morning. I want to say first, thank you for allowing me to be in your community. And it's ironic, when I wrote that I wanted to talk about honoring the voice, wisdom, and experience, I didn't realize you were going to have young people here, because that is it. That is it. And while we can talk about collective impact, things that we're going to talk about later on today, that voice is what rings most true for me. And so what I want to do in the time that I'm going to share with you is to talk about my journey to being able to figure out, how do I honor that voice, wisdom, and experience of community, do it in a way that is results-oriented, and try to unpack, at least for what I see in the States and the more I travel around the world, the next challenge for all of us as leaders. How many of you all want to get results in this room? How many of you all really want to change the world? How many of you all want to make sure these young people have the quality of life that we all hope for our own children? No resistance there. And yet, every day there is something going on in America and around this country where we have that passion and we do something totally different. We spend our whole lives trying to go to university, our working community, to get positions of power and influence, and then we get in them and we forget that voice. We get caught up in bureaucracy, we get caught up in statutes and regulations, and we forget that those are tools that we could use if something was to happen differently. And that's what I want to share with you in the context of Promised Neighborhoods and collective impact. Collective impact is this really new frame about how do we go about getting large-scale community change. And this is very important, because I'm not talking about small programs anymore. No matter where I've been in the world, we know we can do good work. We know we can do good work at a small scale. We can help 100 families, we can help 100 children, we can help 100 business owners. But our problems are much bigger. In the States, if that's all we're going to do is serve a few 100,000 children when we've got nearly 16 million in poverty, it's not a fighting chance. And so you can see very quickly when your political opposition says, well, why aren't those statistics changing? You can see why. You're not even at a statistically significant number to impact it, right? And yet we're getting beat down every day because of that. It's time for us to stop that and actually live up to what I consider to be our God-given ability. It is time for us to figure out, how do we craft solutions at scale? How do we craft solutions that allow us to meet the demand that is out there in our communities? And we can do that. I'm always amazed at how, when there is a tragedy in the States, we can organize across party lines like you've never seen. We saw that with Hurricane Sandy. We saw it with a host of other things. Mudslides, earthquakes in California where I live. We organized. There's something to that phenomena. And for me, it's not just about observing it. It is about actually thinking about, what do I do with it in my own life? And so there's a couple things that I would say as we start thinking about collective impact. Collective impact is a new frame, but it absolutely means nothing if you don't internalize it in a new way. I always lament all the self-help books in the bookstores, because sometimes that stuff becomes work avoidance. You can read all the books and never do the work. Collective impact could be another frame, just like that. You read all the frames, you go to all the conferences, you know the language of collective impact. And yet when someone says, well, what has changed about your own individual leadership? The answer is absolutely nothing. You sound impressive. People like the talk. But when the tally of your impact is measured, it is quite minuscule. And that's what we got to change. There's really only 5 things that collective impact talks about: shared agenda, shared measurement, continuous communication, having a backbone organization, mutually reinforcing activities. Nothing about that is really shattering, but there's a couple of nuances in it that are different, and I think that they can help us. One of those is that when you think about collective impact, the thing that it says is different than just the collaboration literature of the 90s is that you're actually trying to have a disciplined approach, a disciplined way of execution. Now think about this. It sounds very basic, but when's the last time we organized a community process where if someone came in there and said, what is the best evidenced practice going on in how you assembled this meeting? Not that you just called 100 people together and put them in a room and said, start talking. Because that's usually what we do. And then we get frustrated because then it doesn't work. The conversation isn't structured right with discipline. The politics isn't managed right with discipline. The competing interests aren't managed. We just simply called a meeting and said, we want to change the world. Collective impact asks us to do something a little different, to bring some discipline and rigor to our work. In the States, we use the frame results-based accountability as a disciplined way of executing. In the Strive article, in the Collective Impact article, you'll see others like Strive talk about using Six Sigma. Really doesn't matter what you use. What you are trying to begin to do is think about a disciplined way of thinking and a disciplined way of carrying out the work. Not particularly earth-shattering. But there's another thing as well, and that is beginning to create the infrastructure so you can actually get the work done. That we can actually begin to get efficient and effective at how we go about trying to do the work. I can tell you in the States with Promised Neighborhoods, the federal program that I work with the White House and 61 communities across the country, a perfect example of not working effectively is that there is a requirement that we will use data for learning, continuous improvement, and shared accountability. Most of the companies that we're working with have been in business for 20 plus years. Some of them are deciding that they are going to actually go and build a new data system. Now think about that. You've been around for 20 years. This is not your first data system. It's not like there are not things out there in the store that you could buy on the market and begin to operationalize things. But we soon begin to get distracted with the idea of playing around the edges. If I just get my data system built after 3 years, then maybe I can get to results, but your grant is only for 5. That's the type of inefficiency that collective impact is requiring us to address. So I'm going to unpack some of this for you. The first thing with me about collective impact that is very important when you get those 5 things: shared agenda, shared measurement, continuous communication, mutually reinforcing activities, and the backbone organization, which are the components. Something has to happen with you. And that something is that you've got to decide what type of leader you want to be. And this is, to me, the most important thing that I think we can do today, is to think about, how will I lead on the work? I always use the analogy that where I sit in the work in the States is at the national level as an intermediary. And people will pay you just to fly around community to community and just talk. And they will love you. Just go to communities and talk and do some PowerPoints and leave. But that's not the work, folks. There are 10 results and 15 indicators associated with every Promised Neighborhoods. And those 10 results and 15 indicators are designed to make sure that children in our poorest neighborhoods have the supports they need from the time they're born to the time they enter into the workforce. And our job is to build that system of supports. So actually, people are actually not paying me to fly around the country and talk. They should be paying me for getting results, right? They're actually not paying me to write a bunch of papers, but intermediary organizations do that a lot. Those things are important, but they actually don't necessarily have anything to do with the work. And let me tell you why. If I don't come to this work holding the population interest, I quickly devolve into mediocrity. So when I told you that there's 16 million children in America in poverty, and on a good day, a Promised Neighborhoods might be at 300, you can see very quickly that if I don't have a powerful vision for the work, it doesn't go anywhere. So the first thing is that I'm holding that population, and the reason why I'm holding that population is because I am that population. The only difference between me and those other children is that I stumbled into opportunity in communities. My sisters didn't. There were folks who took the time when I failed, when I had a daughter before I graduated from college and couldn't even afford to take care of myself. There were folks who took care of me. There were folks like Captain Garza, who made me decide whether I wanted to try to continue to stay in the Army, or if I wanted to wallow in my misery because now I've got a woman pregnant. And it was the best gift that he did. He was beginning to hold me accountable. I had a father held me accountable. Dr. Arthur Kemp, a university professor, held me accountable. But the thing is, it was random. It was random. I just stumbled across it. And I wouldn't be here today if I just didn't luck up. Our children deserve better than randomized opportunity. And that's what I'm asking you to think about. So I come to the work very differently. I come to the work holding, what do we want for the population? The 16 million. It's great that we have a federal program that will help 300,000. That's so what? There's 16 million children that I know we have the intellectual and resource capacity to figure out how to support if we chose to think about it. And even if we can, I'd much rather fight that fight than to call it quits before we even start the journey, right? And so the thing about collective impact that is important to me is that you start by thinking about the population, because the uniqueness of collective impact is that there is a solution. There's a problem that is too big for one organization, one individual. That's great. The invitation with the frame is that it invites us to dream big and do big work. That's the invitation. And so if we can think about the population and we can ask ourselves, what are the conditions of well-being for that population, we can begin to set about doing the work. And this is very important because remember, I said as a national intermediary, I could run around and my work could be not actually thinking about the population, but figuring out how many articles I'm going to write, how many speeches I'm going to give, how many times I'm going to visit communities. That's a different standard. So the first thing we decided to do as a national intermediary, we said we would own the same 10 results and 15 indicators that our colleagues on the ground own. That puts a lot of stress on you when you're not on the ground. How many of you all have been in jobs where you're accountable for something, but you actually don't really have any authority? That's collective impact, folks. You have to learn to lead without controlling anything. John Gardner calls that exercising non-jurisdictional leadership. That's our job. And so that's why you've got to come to the work ready to be a results-based leader. A leader that's going to hold the interest of the population, and then a leader that has some technique and discipline to back it up so that you can get work. So the first thing is we said we would own the same 10 results and 15 indicators, and that we would begin to think about the 16 million in poverty. That really forces you to think about the work totally different. Now I'm actually not thinking about how many papers can I write, how many site visits I can do. I'm thinking about how can I help local leaders on the ground accelerate their capacity to get the work done. And so we landed on 3 things. We only deserve to exist if we accelerate local leaders' ability to get results, if we're building evidence that what we're doing is working, and then if we can scale and sustain it. If we can't do those things, we should just go out of business. And so then that meant that we could begin to do some real work. It meant that we would not allow folks to just go off and start building infrastructure that wasn't necessary, but that we would build national infrastructure. We would actually buy a data system for the nation. So instead of it taking 3 years, we can get people up in 6 months. We can reduce the cost from $2.5 million a year. We can save that much. And our network members can get on about the business of doing their work. Now, after 3 years, 80% are using the data system. That's a pretty good number when no one has to listen to me, right? 100% are using the scorecard, the data dashboard. Now, here's why this is so important. Imagine trying to get results and you don't even know your baseline, where you're moving from. And you don't even know the targets, where you're going to. And you don't even have a way of understanding the evidence-based practices that give you a fighting chance of making progress. That's what our communities are doing every day. They're driving in the dark. And that's why these technical solutions, these technical pieces of infrastructure were very important, but they're not actually the adaptive work. I want to be very clear about that. They were technical solutions that lead us to beginning to do the adaptive work. The technical solution required that I do a couple things differently. First, reimagine my role. Focus on the population. Be bold enough to risk putting infrastructure out there maybe that people didn't want to get. They didn't want to buy it, but risking. And it also meant that I had to make a decision to be technically out of alignment with the U.S. Department of Education. Meaning, I was igniting conflict. I ignited conflict because I realized you can't have a federal program that is not permanent yet under the Obama administration get launched, and you can't tell a results story at the end of the administration. You've lost before you've even started. You see my point? And now it's not that you just lose on the program. You make the case for why federal policy should even focus on helping poor children again. That's what you end up losing by lacking discipline, by lacking vision. And so we made a choice to be out of alignment and to figure out how to get back in alignment later. But imagine, I'm starting to cut into my livelihood. I was fired in my 20s for trying to lead on the same work. That's the irony of it, folks. We can keep running away from this work. We're going to come back to it because this is the work. Creating communities of opportunities is what it is. I got fired in the 90s and I'm back doing it again. And the work hasn't changed. Can we support our children from cradle to career? Can our institutions serve? And so I'm taking up my leadership in a different way because I'm trying to create an institution that is going to behave different, that is going to serve, that is going to hold the whole population and figure out then how do we back into figuring out the supports that are necessary to make it happen. And that meant that I've got to be willing to take some risk. I've got to actually begin to wade into the white water and be okay with that. So we're igniting conflict. We're behaving in a way where people are like, why would you do this? You shouldn't have a national data system. People should just do their own thing. We're saying we're going to own the 10 results, and people are saying, well, why would you do that? If you can't show progress, you fail. Yes, I do. We do. That's the difference. We fail in collective impact. It doesn't matter if one organization is good. It doesn't matter if Minneapolis is successful and the rest of the sites fail. Because remember, we're holding population level results. So 10,000 children in Minneapolis is not 16 million. You see my point? That's the challenge. So we built this infrastructure. We started trying to create a culture of discipline, a common language, a common way of relating. For us, we use results-based accountability. We introduced that into the network. Introducing results-based accountability in the network gave us that disciplined approach, it gave us that common language, and it allowed us to begin to accelerate. Because what it said was this: if we cannot talk about the conditions of well-being and the measures of progress, which we already had, 10 results, 15 indicators, and then think about the baselines, the targets, the evidence-based solutions, the partners who are going to get the work done, and then their performance measures, you actually don't have anything but hopes and aspirations. And so that discipline of doing those few things was very important to us, because what we usually do is we just start doing stuff. Rarely do we stop and say, what's the evidence for that it is really the right stuff to do? We rarely stop and ask who should be doing it. We usually try to make everyone happy. In the States, if there's $1 million, we just try to divide it up by the number of people in the room, because we don't want to make anyone mad. But collective impact and results-based accountability is not asking you to do that. It's asking you to support the folks who can deliver, because it's about getting results. It's not about maintaining systems that actually are working against what we want. And that is a different perspective about this work today, folks. Doesn't matter what political spectrum you're on, where you rest. This is about creating the conditions by which we can advance a set of results that lift people out of poverty and builds the capacity of our institutions to serve. Every last one of you in this room have to own that. It is not about looking at someone else. It is not about looking at the government and saying, well, they should do this. It is not about looking at philanthropy and saying they should do that. Each and every one of us can take up our leadership how we choose to. I could have chose just to not have any conflict and try to be a darling nationally. It's not really that fun. When you introduce these disciplined ways of being, it allows you then to get to the adaptive work. The adaptive work is the work for which there are no answers, and you're struggling to figure it out, and no one has the authority and responsibility to do it all themselves. Building the capacity of school districts to teach well is an example. Trying to get community members in a room with school district officials and trying to get them to be honest about that they really don't respect each other. They oblige each other. They're nice. And then they go in the parking lot and they tear each other apart. How many of you all have been in meetings like that? People are very cordial. They go out in that parking lot and they really say what they mean, right? The adaptive work is to have that conversation in that room and begin to figure out how do we build the trust and the capital that it takes to move the institution. So often we try to use a program to do the dirty work. A program is not going to change a school district. It's not. And we've got to stop being delusional about the efficacy of the strategy that we're employing. A program has its place. But there are some things that leaders at an institutional level just have to decide to do or not. There are some things that leaders at an institutional level have to decide to do or not to make their institutions great. And that's where we've got to get to, folks, beginning to try to have an opportunity where we can let go of our desire to do good with our desire to advance achieving results for a population. That is collective impact. And our journey as a results-based leader is to do that. For many years, I wanted to do good work, and I got frustrated because I couldn't. I got frustrated, and I would blame everybody else. They're not smart. They don't have passion. They don't care. Institutions don't want to serve. That's not actually true. Everyone in this room, it seemed just about said that they are here because they want to deliver. And so ask yourself, what's going on with our institutions when they can't serve? Why is that? You know, I believe it is because every last one of us slowly begins to accept mediocrity. Every day, we begin to accept that it's okay. It's hard. We start using these words like change take time. We didn't get in this problem overnight. We're not going to get out of it. And that is absolutely true. But if you got performance measures, you darn well know whether you're making progress or not. That's the difference. Without that, you don't know. And when we go into meetings, when we set up these efforts, these new initiatives to start, and we bring a lack of discipline, we don't really imagine the work differently, we are accepting mediocrity because we are actually better than that. We are actually better than that. And our institutions are suffering not because of the folks who don't care about children, that's a part of it, but there is also a contribution that we're making because we care, because we're nice, because we're conflict avoiders, because we won't bring technique to our practice. We are equal partners in the destruction of the institutions that we've set up to serve. We are. In the States, if you ask so many folks, how did you vote on that last school bond measure? They don't care because their children are out of school. So they don't see any connectedness to the rest of humanity. And you know what happens now in America? Middle-class Americans can't even afford to move back into the city centers because they can't afford the housing cost and the child care costs and the school costs to send their kids to private school. So see, neglect catches up with you. Being mediocre catches up with you. You may think that it's not your children. It's not your problem. It soon becomes your problem. So I remember when my parents took me out of school in the 70s because they started busing, and I look now, you want to live in the middle inner city of Kansas City, you got to be able to afford the housing costs and to send your kids to private school because you're not sending them to the public institution. You're just not going to do that. How unfortunate. And then think about what you now are creating in society, a parallel society where underfunded institutions send out a certain product into the world and those that are resourced send out another. That is creating randomized opportunity, folks. And too many of us have become comfortable with that. We talk about it in these terms that are academic, that are sterile, that lack personalization. We don't own it. And what I'm asking you to think about when you think about collective impact and all the sessions you're going to have today is, what do you own? What do you own about the change you want to see in the world? Because that is the journey that I am on. That's all I can do is own my contribution. And it is powerful when you choose to own one. It is powerful what happens when you own a contribution. And when you lie in bed at night, you can honestly say that your effort is commensurate with your God-given ability. That's a good place to be. It's a hard place to be because it's scary. It is scary right now that we are 3 years into the Federal Promised Neighborhoods program, and folks are still trying to figure it out. But then when I think about the reality, cradle to career work would suggest a 20-year journey, correct? We're 3 years into a 20-year journey. I got to be in this for the long haul. We're 3 years into a 20-year journey. And what we've created in the States is that people actually think you're going to achieve population level results in 3 years, and that's not accurate, folks. In 20 years, we'll still be doing the work. And in this sector, those of us who care about this work have to be honest about the time that it takes to deliver. None of us in this room stop investing in our children because they were bad at math in the 3rd grade. And say, because you failed that class, I'm going to stop investing in you. How many of you all do that? That's the idiocy, though, that we subject our children in the States. If a program doesn't work, we're going to stop funding those kids. It didn't work for them. If I was in any of your programs, I would have threw your numbers off so badly when I was a child. For the worse. Folks, we don't know when opportunity will stick. We don't know that. And it's not for us to know. What it is for us to know are the conditions of well-being and how we want to behave and how we're advancing the ball on trying to improve our institutions. And then come what may, we all have to still step into the opportunity. You cannot take that individual choice away, but we sure can make sure that we have a level playing field. That is our job, to improve the capacity of our institutions to serve. For each and every one of us to take up our leadership in a way that is results-based. For each of us to take up our leadership in a results-based and then to have the ability to execute in a disciplined way. That's our job. That is our job when you hear about collective impact today. It's amazing what happens when people actually decide they want to get some results. They get them. Because I can tell you, folks, we have empirical evidence that we know how to get results. When we underfund things, we get great results, do we not? We destroy institutions. We know how to do it. When we want a stadium in a city, we know how to go get that stadium. When we want to bring a business to our community, we know how to give them all the tax credits in the world. We know how to behave the right way. We really do. And our job is not to be delusional about the fact that we know how to get what we want. We're not confused. We don't actually need another framework. We don't actually need another thing. Those are important. What we need are leaders who are simply not going to accept the excuse that we're doing the best that we can. Because we're actually not. And those of us who have been around any amount of time, we know communities know what to do. And we see them do it when they choose to. And our job has to be, how do we begin to create this groundswell, this drumbeat that says that, you know what? When children come up here and express their vision for a city, first of all, most of the things that they talked about, if you looked at any city planning document, you would see in there. There's high alignment. That's exciting. There is high alignment between the hopes and aspiration of children and what we actually aspire to. The question is, can we do it at scale? Yes, we can. Or we certainly should just at least try. And that's what I'm asking you to think about today, that collective impact is not a silver bullet. Just like any of us taking up our leadership is not a silver bullet, it is the start of an exciting journey of being accountable for trying to get population level results. Remember, this is not about small scale stuff. If we all can be committed to holding the population, imagine what it would ignite in our communities, folks. Imagine the different conversations you would have about resources. I can tell you, there's not a scarcity problem when you're talking about 16 million children. There's a scarcity problem about who's going to get funding when you're talking about 100. There's major competition around who's going to serve that 100, who's going to serve that neighborhood. I don't know if it's like here, it is in the States, but there's hyper competition about who gets to be on what turf. And the sad thing about it, while we're fighting over a little piece of turf, the rest of the city is ours for the taking. That is the sad part, while we're fighting over this little piece of land over here. The entire city is there for the taking. And your job has to be acutely aware of that opportunity and to seize it. You know, when I took this job, I left a comfortable federal government job. I had met my wife in the city of Chicago. I was making great money. And from an individual standpoint, I was doing very well. But you know what? It wasn't the work. It wasn't the work. It was not the work. And when this opportunity came up, it really challenged me to practice what I preach, because it meant that I'm leaving the security and the high-paying comfort of a federal position to wade into an environment where I've got to deal with Congress, I've got to deal with the White House, I've got to deal with 61 communities, I've got to deal with all their perceptions, all the politics that's going on, and find a way to help contribute. That's a scary place to be in and control nothing, but people expect you to do something. But I can tell you, I've never felt more alive. I have never felt more alive. And the reason for that is because it is exciting to be able to join your partners in community to try to do big work. There is not a better feeling to really be able to say, you know what? If I go to San Antonio, if I go to Minneapolis, if I go to Washington, D.C., if I go to Boston, if I go to San Francisco, if I go to Los Angeles, we actually are holding the same result. Just a different piece of the population, but we're actually holding the same result. And those same sites can tell you the disciplined way in which they're going about the work. It looks very different in those communities. But to watch a generation of folks learn a different way because of the collective impact frame is powerful. And that's what we're seeing happen in the States. Folks are actually saying, you know what, I can be results-based. I can bring discipline to this work. I can lead in a different way. And I actually don't have to wait for someone to authorize me to take that up. I have agency right now. And so as you go through these sessions, think about that. What is the population that you serve? What is the population that you serve? How do you choose to take up your leadership in a different way? The last thing I'll say as we think about this work is this. Sometimes when we think about frames and we come to conferences, we lose what I think is very important for us to hold as we go through them. How does it relate to the action that we will take when we leave? Because that's what we need to be thinking about. What is the action that we're going to take up because of this work? And that's what we have to struggle with. Because if you're in a position where you know if you tweak the regulation here, it would change things for millions of people's lives, ask yourself, why aren't you doing that? I can't tell you how many people, if they took the time in the states to really understand regulations, because you can change regulations, you can amend those. Statutes you can't, that's the law, so you got to go through another process. But if we just got nerdy enough sometimes to begin to really read the regulations, many of which have not been modified since the 70s or the 80s, we could unleash a powerful potential for children and families. But you know what? We don't perceive that to be the work. There is policy work that needs to be done. There is systems work that needs to be done. There is programmatic work that needs to be done. There is community building work that needs to be done. And all of it can be done by us on any given day. And we can move in and out of those roles and do great things. And so I'm asking you to think about that. What is the boldest work that you can do that has you at the edge of your competence and the height of being uncomfortable? Because that's that space that I'm constantly trying to find. I need to be at the edge of my competence. Because you know what, folks? The reality is this. Until we behave different, there's not much else that needs to be written, quite frankly. Until we behave differently, there's not much else that needs to be written, because the innovation is how we end up figuring out how to organize ourselves to get a different result for children and families across the nation, across the globe. That's where the innovation is at. And so we all have an opportunity to join a very grand experiment, which is to figure out how do we extend the body of knowledge of how we as global citizens organize ourselves to improve the lives for so many in this population around the world that does not have access to opportunity. That's our calling. And we can do that. Collective impact is a frame that will allow you to hold that work. How you step into it is your choice. But I can tell you, when you step into this work and you own it, great things can happen. We are 3 years into a 20-year journey. I'm seeing sites being able to reverse what they would call the summer slide, meaning kids are entering in the summer and then they're losing core proficiency in like reading and math during the summertime. I'm seeing school test scores go up 20 plus points because they are doing the work in those schools to improve them. I'm seeing families care about how they raise their children, learning not to scream and yell at them and create toxic stress. When you see this stuff happen from families who are stressed out and they're learning basic things like, you know what? It's actually creating too much stress for my child when I'm screaming at them and telling them no, stop, when they're trying to simply discover the world. It's a powerful thing to watch a mother and a father, watch that light bulb go off in their head when they actually understand that there is a way that they can parent that gives their children a fighting chance. When they learn the difference in word acquisition between children who come from a different income and a different zip code and theirs, and that they actually can do something about that. Don't need a program. They actually can read to their children and improve their chances of being successful in school. That's powerful, folks. And so the last thing I'll say is this. When we talk about being results-based leaders, we are talking about everyone having a contribution. And so when we think about the work of population-level results, there's one thing that I want you to remember, because you saw it today. Community matters. And if you go into community and community doesn't own a result, and they can't tell you their contribution, we have not done our job. We honor the voice, wisdom, and experience by not being caretakers for folks, but joining them as partners. And I can tell you, I can't tell you how many communities I go into, and everybody's got their whiteboard of results and indicators, and then you ask the question, where are the parents? Where are the children? What do they own in this? And the answer is nothing. That's not collective impact. Think of collective impact as the individual, how we operate in our role, how we operate in our system. If we do that, we will transform the world. Thank you. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Michael. We have an opportunity. It was extraordinary. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have an opportunity to ask Michael questions if we like. So if you're happy to be Dr. Phil, I'll be Oprah.
All right,
okay?
I'll come down here.
All right. Questions for Michael, please.
I'm Anthea, and I work in Child Health and Parenting Service North. I would like to say, Michael, many years ago when I did my training initially in child and family health, George Benson, I did a presentation, Children Are Our Future, is a modified version, and I would like to make a claim to that and to be able to say, to give children more of a voice in the future that is theirs, and therefore at the collective level of making an impact with boards, with community-based meetings, that they be right up there to give their voice authentically.
That's right.
And as well, I did in a master's many years ago, Labont work and population-based empowering strategies. And I would like to give credibility to that approach, that it's lobbying for the whole.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a term in this country, we say, I'll take that as a comment. Thank you. That's the Tony Jones approach, isn't it? Thank you for that remark. We've got a question over here.
Michael, is it?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Look, I would like to say that your presentation was totally brilliant, and I feel that everyone in this room will be taking away something new with them today, because you've showed us how to drive and how to move on, and so you're a brilliant speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Auntie Phyllis. Do we have any questions? I know we all adore Michael and want to take him home and keep him here forever. But questions, ones with the big question mark at the end. Yes, thanks.
My name's Tanya. I'm from St Mary's on the East Coast. I was wondering if you could speak a little around igniting conflict. We have a reasonable amount of conflict in our community, but not always positive. So how can we make that conflict a more positive outcome for people?
Well, I think igniting conflict is a part of our work. I don't think you get to solving these problems with avoiding it. And I think that's where we have technique and skill that we can bring to it. I think when you're holding the population level result and you're then bringing discipline execution, by the mere fact that you're doing that, you're going to ignite conflict. And then our job is to do what we call create a container. How do we create a container for us to have the right conversations when we bring people together? That is igniting conflict in a way that is actually not pushing people away, but allowing them to find a way to join in the contribution. So for me, conflict is not something that we quite frankly worry about. It's to be managed. It's to be anticipated. It is something that you put in the room because you think about it. Trying to improve a school system is by its nature going to cause conflict, right? There's multiple competing interests. There's no new ground there. But there are things that we can do, those of us who are conscious about. I'll give you a perfect example. So often in school districts in America, the problem between the after-school providers and the school district is because they don't talk the same language. It's not because they actually don't want to serve children in a coordinated way. It's they don't really understand and respect each other's work. And so when you set that container to try to bring these groups together, if you don't understand and respect where they're coming from, you just put them in the room and say, hey, let's serve children. Well, they're going to be polite. Why? What is it in the interest of a school district to say, you know what, I don't respect you after school providers. You want to come into my school, you don't care about the union, you don't care about trying to align your work with what the teachers are struggling with, and vice versa. So no, I don't want that. Or you want my data. You want my data, but if something goes wrong with this data, I'm actually going to be on the news at night, not you. These are real issues, right? And our job is, if we can manage that and create that space where people can struggle through finding the answer together, that's a great way of igniting conflict. And that's what I'm trying to suggest here. Conflict is not something that we just go around trying to ignite because we like it, if some of those of us who aren't really averse to it. It is about understanding that when we ignite the conflict, that is the work. The work is for us to be honest about what we want to do. To be honest about the constraints that we're under. One of the best things I'm proud of at the Promised Neighborhoods Institute in America is that we actually figured out how to work with the U.S. Department of Education in a way where we are in alignment. I understand their barriers now. Before I would say, well, why don't they just do this? They got to go through the legal counsel. They got Congress to worry about. And we figured it out. We would get in the room and we fought it out, folks. We had some tough conversations. I think what you're doing is stupid. You got a program and no data systems. I'm saying that in the room, not in the parking lot. And they can look at me and say, well, you know, with all due respect, it's our program. We can do what we want to do. We didn't create you as an institute. Foundations did. So get out of our business. That was their feeling. So imagine, philanthropy starts us. This is a federal program. No one's authorized us to be in this space. And now I'm showing up trying to tell them what to do. That's a disrespectful situation by its nature, is it not? Now, my job is not to be afraid of that. I care about the children. I don't care about an institution being happy. So let's figure out how we do it. You see my point? Now, we could play nice and just never figure it out. Rarely does playing nice solve the problems. Getting in the room, and here's what I did. I went to the Annie E. Casey Foundation, big philanthropy in the States, and I said, can you facilitate 4 sessions with us over the summer where we can have some tough conversations? Because we need to have the conflict ignited and figure out how we're going to work together. And that's what they did. We came out of there and we went from having no agreement of how we would get to 10 results and 15 indicators to contributing, to now having quarterly meetings with all the national partners, figuring this work out, having one plan of how we're going to support local sites in every city. That's hard work, because we can move very fast and nimble as a nonprofit. They can't. We got one plan for Minneapolis, one plan for San Francisco, one plan for Boston. That's collective impact. Before, we were doing our thing, Ed was doing theirs, and we all were just trying to stay out of each other's way. Ignite the conflict, create the conditions by which you can manage it, and watch what happens.
More questions just before morning tea? Thank you.
I kind of wrote it down.
Okay.
My name's Madden. As a young person, I really relate to a lot of your passionate drive to change. And I'd like to know how you went about finding positive, helpful mentors, or who your personal and work-related mentors were that helped you get to this point in your life.
It's a powerful question, because I think, one of the things I think that we have a huge problem is we rarely let young people really see how you do this work. And I was really blessed when I came into the field that I stumbled into it. I tried to go start my own foundation after working in the ad agency. Stumbled into the ad agency. I never had career examples. Got lucky, stumbled into an ad agency, and they just wanted me to traffic Baker Square pies and the Missouri Lottery. And I kept trying to turn it into a social cause. So after about 6 months, I went to the CEO, Chuck Cordes, and said, I appreciate it, but I'm going to leave because I'm going to get fired. I set off on my own to try to raise $20 million to seed innovations in education. And I pulled this magazine out called Cranes. I always list the most influential in a city. If nothing else, I can always sniff out money and power. And I started calling them around. I ran into a Jesuit priest named Father Thomas Savage of Rockhurst College and an African-American woman on the city council named Joanne Collins. They took me under their wing. They knew I wasn't going to raise $20 million. They knew I had no credibility in the community, but they saw potential. They introduced me to a woman named Jan Kramer at the Greater Kansas City Community Foundation. Jan took me under her wing at the foundation, and she showed me the politics of how you lead in a community. I had more access to CEOs than most people who work for their companies because they are always at the foundation. Hallmark Cards, Sprint CEOs, these types of people, I got to see them work. And what Jan did for me was she broke down things. Like some days we would bring in $50 million a year through philanthropy. Some days she would say to me, you know what, Michael, we're going to go see this donor. And you know what, I actually can't take you because this donor doesn't want to see African Americans. I appreciated having someone to help me understand the game. She helped me understand how to manage competing interests. Some days she would say, you know what, Michael, as we put this board together, we're not going to put a lot of professional services people, attorneys and accountants on the board because they've got to manage their client base in this community. They're not going to take on too much conflict because they're bringing in business. So she helped me think about all these types of things that if I had not seen early on, I wouldn't have never learned how to do it until it was too late. Now, I still got fired because I pushed them too hard. I still got fired because I pushed them too hard. But I learned how to lead. I learned how to, so my issue here is this, folks. Even one of the folks who helped me from their own leadership is in this room, Kathy Merchant. She was running a national program. And I got to watch, I believe it was the Pew Charitable Trust, I got to watch how Kathy led that. So think about it. Kathy wasn't central to collective impact at that time, but she's one of the ringleaders of helping to bring that across to the nation. I had a benefit of watching her well before this was even cooked up. Imagine if we have leaders coming through the pipeline who actually know how to lead with a disciplined approach, understanding how to manage the complexity of politics, race, class, culture, all these issues. So what I would challenge you to do is to make sure that people are putting you on boards, that when we're doing this work, we're saying, where are the young people in the room? When we're fighting it out, where are they learning how to fight in a way that is productive? Where are they learning how to strategize and craft strategy? Where are they actually learning to do the adaptive work of finding answers that are not known when they don't control anything? That's how I learned it. And most importantly, I learned it early on because I got fired. I learned early on that I'm most happiest when I'm doing the toughest work. That's my vocation. And so what I was most happy about getting fired is because I was under 30 making $80,000 a year in Kansas City, that's pretty good, is that I don't actually want to get comfortable. It doesn't feed my spirit. So the question for me then became, if I love being uncomfortable, how do I do so in a way that is actually productive and doesn't destroy me and doesn't destroy community? That was the gift that they gave me. They loved me and built me up. They loved me enough to fire me because they needed to, because I did contribute to my firing. And then I figured out a way to survive and operate nationally in that work. That's what we should be doing for young people, bringing them on board so that they can get that type of experience.
Michael McAfee, everybody.